I used to live in a rural part of Arkansas, surrounded by nothing but dirt, fields, and woods. The nearest supermarket was more than 30 minutes away, and at most there was a rundown Quick Mart stationed between the two locations. My father ran a farm, so we lived on an expansive plot of land. The house was 2 stories, and the top floor had big windows overlooking the fields. My aunt lived with us, along with my grandfather. He wasn't doing well, his mind was slipping away, and Alzheimer's had taken hold. He often didn't remember who we were. It was hard. My aunt and I clung to each other. Despite being my father's younger sister, she was only a couple of years older than me. My grandfather had run around a lot in his younger days. As for my dad, he was battling an addiction with alcohol, though, if I'm being honest, wasn't a battle he was winning. Still, I tried to be hopeful. Those years were rough, and I think that made my aunt and me more susceptible to the things we endured that summer. We were just kids, only 14 and 16. We were scared of everything. It didn't help that we spent our free time watching satirical horror videos or staying up late playing scary games. We fed into our paranoia, willingly or not. The house was old and creaky, with wooden panels lining the exterior and matching walls inside. It was big enough for my aunt and me to deem hide-and-seek worthy, even at our age. We did a lot of childish stuff like that. The night it all started, we were up late as usual. It was around 2 a.m. We had been binging storytime videos on YouTube, and were in the middle of an adult coloring sheet contest. Then, that feeling crept in, the kind that makes your blood run cold. The hairs on your arms stand. It felt as if we were being watched. Figuring it was only paranoia stemming from playing until dawn earlier that night, we brushed it off. Maybe that was all it was, but no matter how much we reasoned with ourselves, we couldn't shake the feeling. Sitting at the rounded table, with my aunt directly beside me, I quickly glanced at the vent behind me. I feel like someone's watching us. From the vent. My aunt snapped her head toward me, her voice exasperated. "Bro, why would you say that?" The color drained from her face. Tossing all rationality out the window, we decided the best course of action was to start taping our coloring sheets over the upstairs vents. Then, just like that, the feeling lifted, like we had somehow sealed away whatever was watching us. The coloring sheets stayed up for days until my dad found them and took them down, thinking we were just being goofy. By then, the strange feeling had faded, and life went back to normal, or so we had led ourselves to believe. The next occurrence was while playing hide-and-seek. The house was full of good hiding spots, like small nooks and crawl spaces, just big enough to squeeze into if you tried hard enough. It was my turn to hide. I went downstairs to the pantry closet. My usual spot was on a large wooden pantry shelf, where I'd stack cans in front of myself to stay hidden. But I wanted to change it up. We had played so many times that my usual hiding places were too predictable. That's when I saw it. A medium-sized air vent behind one of the shelves. It had just enough space that I could crawl in, maybe even some room to spare. It's probably worth mentioning that we would only play hide-and-seek in the dark. Unlatching the vent, I crawled in, carefully replacing the cover behind me. The space was cramped but manageable. I felt a surge of pride. There was no way she would find me here. To add on, it was pitch black inside, making it even easier to stay hidden. I held my breath and listened. The countdown ended. Footsteps echoed through the house, doors opening and closing. Then the sound drew closer. I stayed perfectly still. A soft glow trickled through the cracks of the door as she peered in. I could just barely see her eyes scanning the room. She stood there momentarily, directly in front of me, the vent, and from my curled-up position, she looked taller than usual, looming. As she turned to leave, I could see her hesitate. Slowly, she knelt down and snapped the vent latch shut. I held my breath. A wave of panic hit me. Was she messing with me? Did she actually not know I was in here? She walked away, and I let out a shaky exhale. I stayed curled up in the vent, convinced she was bluffing. But then it dawned on me. It had been over 20 minutes. A terrible realization sank in. She wasn't coming back. She didn't know I was in here. I pressed my palms flat against the vent, pushing on the metal. There was no give. As I tried to maneuver myself around, I quickly discovered it was impossible to exert enough strength to make it budge. And then I felt it. A presence. Something watching, staring at me. Every bit of air left my lungs. My stomach twisted into tight knots. Slowly, I shifted my eyes to the side. Darkness. I craned my neck, looking over my shoulder. More darkness. Except for a faint glint, light reflecting off of something's eyes. They shifted rapidly, darting from side to side. Panic surged through me as I frantically clawed and shoved against the vent, throwing my weight into it with all my strength. But I was wedged in too tightly. My body screamed at me to push harder, but no matter how much I struggled, it wouldn't budge. A breath, warm and slow, pools out, dense and damp, creeping around my neck like unseen fingers that linger too long. A shrill cry tore from my throat. My limbs burned, metal biting into my skin as I clawed frantically. Help! The vent pantry, I'm stuck. A skittering shuffle closed in behind me. The thing shifted, creeping closer. Its presence coiled around me, suffocating, its breath, hotter than before, tinged with the stench of rot. Suddenly, the door flung open. I could see the silhouette of my aunt as she knelt down, fumbling with the vent latch. And then light, feathered footsteps scurried away, retreating deeper into the vents, carrying its putrid scent with it. I bolted out, gasping, trembling. Something was in there. It was watching me, breathing. I swear I felt it breathing. She paled. You're lying. Tell me you're lying. I'm not. I gasped out, clutching my chest. Her face twisted. Fear, denial, something desperate clawing at the edges of her expression. She swallowed hard, but it did nothing to steady her shaking hands that she balled into fists. That night, we covered the pantry vent with coloring sheets and swore never to go near it again. We tried, desperately, to rationalize it. Maybe the darkness was playing tricks on us. Maybe we had let fear take control, let paranoia consume us. But deep down, we knew the truth. We never played hide-and-seek again. A few weeks had passed. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. But I still felt it, watching. I would wake up multiple times throughout the night, convinced I saw eyes staring at me. I'd force myself to sleep, telling myself it wasn't real. Until that night. I woke up needing to use the bathroom. Most nights we went together, but it was late and my aunt was fast asleep. Guilt gnawed at me, so I didn't wake her. Instead, I stood in the doorway, staring into the dark, forcing myself to move. I shook my hands at my sides, trying to shake off the nerves, then took a step forward. The moment my foot passed the threshold, it landed on something. A crinkle sounded beneath my foot, sharp, sudden. I looked down, squinting my eyes to make out the foreign object. A coloring sheet. The one from the pantry vent. I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood, and a cold sweat broke out across my skin, heavy and suffocating. Terror gripped me, paralyzing every muscle as the air seemed to thicken, pressing in around me. I knew if I looked up, I'd meet its gaze, those eyes, burning into me like a predator's. In that instant, I knew I was its prey. My body went into fight-or-flight mode, and I squeezed my eyes shut, spinning around and running without a second thought. Thud. Then darkness. Slowly my eyes fluttered open, the cold metal biting into my skin. Reluctantly, I raised my head, every muscle in my body taut with fear. The heavy silence loomed around me, suffocating and thick. My breath caught in my throat as I scanned the cramped space. I was inside the vent. Everything you're reading, it's all journal entries. My therapist suggested I start writing things down, a way to process the trauma without having to say it out loud. I didn't tell her everything and kept most details vague, which more than likely was obvious. At first it helped, more than I had initially expected, but then I started writing about that summer. About the thing I saw in the vent, and that's when it started again. Even now as I write this, I can feel it. Watching. Waiting. I've gathered all my entries, but I'm not sure what good they'll truly do for me or anyone else. I don't think I have much time left, so I decided to leave. I'm burning everything, the journals, the house, every trace of this nightmare, every word that has acknowledged this creature. Silence doesn't mean I'm gone. It means I have a chance to survive. When I was 7, I was the center of my parents' universe, until one day everything changed. I was their only child, the apple of their eyes, until the moment they announced a new baby was on the way. Suddenly, I wasn't the sole focus of their love and attention. I remember how, at dinner that night, I blurted out, "I made a new friend." My mom asked, "At school, sweetheart?" And I proudly replied, "No, he lives in the air vents. His name is Marty, and he's magic." My dad gave a small smile and said, "That's fun. Eat your peas, Rosie." But even as he spoke, their eyes were already drifting back to the baby talk. The planning, the nursery colors, the arrangements for the little one who was soon to arrive. Desperate for the undivided attention I'd always enjoyed, I poured every ounce of imagination into my new friend, Magic Marty. I crafted wild stories about him. He only ate jelly beans, could move things with his mind, and even had a cat named Baseball. Every afternoon after school, I'd rush home, my heart racing with anticipation, and call out to him from under my bed. "Marty, did you move my coloring book at school today?" I'd exclaim, hoping that somehow his magical presence would make my parents notice me again. At first, Marty was nothing more than a fun distraction, a story to fill the growing void left by the impending arrival of my sibling. But as days turned into weeks, I began to rely on him for more than just a made-up friend. One evening, after a particularly disheartening day when Mom forgot to hang my gold star paper on the fridge, something that used to make me glow with pride, I slunk under my bed. It was there, among the dust bunnies and forgotten secrets, that I noticed a small air vent hidden in the carpet. Out of a mixture of boredom and a desperate need for connection, I began to talk to it as if it were Marty. To my amazement, a soft, manly voice answered back, "The pink ones taste like cotton candy." I froze. It was exactly the kind of voice I'd imagined for Magic Marty, pleasant, lilting, as if it were a soothing lullaby. In that moment, I felt validated. I felt special. I began spending more time whispering my secrets to the vent, confiding in it about every little victory and disappointment. I told Marty about the plastic snake I'd traded with Arthur at recess, about the hopscotch champion, Marissa S., and even about the moment I realized that my parents were more interested in baby preparations than in my day-to-day life. Each conversation deepened my reliance on him. When I tearfully confessed one day, "I don't want a little brother or sister. I miss when Mom and Dad only had time for me," Marty replied in that same gentle tone. "Of course you don't," he said, with a touch of mischief. "What good are babies anyway? Noisy little stinkers. I bet you can do a cartwheel." His encouragement was both silly and oddly comforting. In that brief, magical moment, I forgot about my fears of being replaced. But then, the magic began to sour. One day after school, I came home to the news that Mom, Dad, and baby Sophie had returned from the hospital. Sophie was a tiny, pink bundle of skin and soft hair, cute in a way, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was an unwelcome reminder of the change that had upended my life. That night, as I lay in bed, I tried to block out the incessant cries of baby Sophie by hiding under my covers, hoping that Marty would return to console me. But when I whispered Marty, nothing came back. I waited and waited until exhaustion finally lulled me to sleep. I woke in a blaze of red and blue lights, not from a dream, but from the harsh reality of flashing police car signals. A stern-faced officer was gently prying me from under the bed. In that disoriented moment, I remembered that police visits only meant trouble. Soon after, I learned the unthinkable. My parents had been brutally murdered in their sleep. Stab wounds, chaos, and a failed abduction that left baby Sophie missing, her crib ominously empty. I was told I was lucky to have been found hiding. Somehow, my hiding had saved me from a fate worse than I could imagine. The years that followed were a blur of foster homes, therapy sessions, and a slow, painful realization that I had grown up without the unconditional love I once took for granted. In therapy, I eventually understood that Magic Marty had been more than just a story. He had been my coping mechanism, a way to fill the emptiness, to feel special when I felt utterly abandoned. Despite all the hardship, I managed to piece together a semblance of a life. I graduated, met someone kind, got married, and even became pregnant, a long-awaited chance to build a family of my own. Then, one ordinary day, as I was setting up my daughter's nursery, I dropped one of her soft little blankets near an air vent. A chill shot through me, a flashback to those long-ago days when Marty's voice had comforted me. I tried to dismiss the shiver as nothing more than a memory, telling myself that Magic Marty wasn't real. But before I could settle my racing thoughts, a voice, as syrupy sweet as dripping honey, whispered, "It's coming, isn't it, Rosie?" I staggered backwards, my heart pounding, as the voice continued in that familiar, unsettling tone. "Is it a little girl, Rosie?" "I hope it is." I fixed it. There was a cruel edge to his laughter, a sound that mingled delight with something far more sinister. In that horrifying moment, I realized that my desperate need to be special had allowed him to take on a life of his own, a life that had not ended with my childhood. His final, chilling words, "The pink ones taste like cotton candy," echoed in my ears as I fled the nursery, my mind reeling with the inescapable truth that some parts of our past refuse to fade away. Now, as I stand at the threshold of a new beginning with my own child, I am haunted by the realization that the voices of our childhood, especially those born out of loneliness and desperation, can sometimes come back with a vengeance. I left that day knowing that I could never escape the shadow of Magic Marty, a ghost of a coping mechanism that became all too real. It took years of therapy and hard-won acceptance to believe that I was special on my own, without the need for magical reassurance. Yet, that day in the nursery shattered any illusion I had built, leaving me to confront the fact that even as adults, our unresolved childhood fears can come back in the most unexpected and terrifying ways. This story isn't just about a girl who felt left behind. It's about the deep, sometimes dangerous, need to feel noticed and valued, and how that need can twist our reality into something unrecognizable. In my case, it allowed a figment of imagination to slip into the real world, turning a long-buried trauma into a nightmare that I can neither forget nor fully escape. I ran from that house, from the voice that had once been my solace, and from the painful reminder that the need to be loved can sometimes summon the darkest parts of our imagination. And though I've built a life filled with love and hope since then, the memory of Magic Marty and his final, horrifying promise will always linger in the corners of my mind, a chilling echo of a time when I was desperately trying to be the center of a world that no longer belonged to me. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more true horror stories.